That moment hits almost everyone, doesn't it?
Mm,
You're in the shower or you're looking at your hairbrush and suddenly your brain just goes, wait, is that too much hair?
right. Is this normal? Or is this the start of something else? It's a really anxiety-inducing question.
It is, and the market is just flooded with miracle cures. It's almost impossible to know where to even begin.
Which is why we're doing this.
Exactly. Our mission for you today is to cut right through all that noise. We are doing a deep dive into alopecia. That's the medical term for hair loss.
We're going to clarify the fundamentals.
Yeah.
Shedding versus actual loss. The big internal triggers like hormones and iron.
And then we're going to get into what the science actually says about all those supplements and treatments you see everywhere.
And we're grounding this whole conversation in really high-quality evidence. We're talking systematic reviews from journals like JAMA Dermatology and, comprehensive medical guides on hair biology.
Okay, so let's unpack this, because the first and I think most critical step is just figuring out what you're actually dealing with. Is it just routine shedding, or is it true loss?
It's fundamental. You have to understand the hair cycle. Hair isn't just growing all the time.
Right, it's a cycle.
It's a cycle. There's a growth phase, anagen, a transition phase, catagen, a rest phase, telogen, and then finally the shedding phase, exogen.
And that shedding part is just the natural end of the process. Our sources say it's completely normal to lose somewhere between, 50 and 150 hairs a day.
Yeah, that's the range. And if you're just seeing strands come out but your overall density feels the same, that's expected. The follicle is healthy and getting ready to grow a new hair.
But hair loss, alopecia, that's a different story.
Fundamentally different. That's when the follicle itself stops producing new hair, or it slows way, way down. That's what leads to visible thinning or bald patches. The cycle isn't just completing, it's broken.
And there's a really simple physical clue you can look for.
Right. Yes, this is such a helpful tip. If you find a hair, look at the root. If it's a naturally shed hair, you'll see a tiny, distinct white bulb at the end.
And that little bulb is a good sign.
It's a great sign. It means the hair completed its full cycle. Now, if the hair is just, snapped in the middle, or the end looks uneven,
That's not loss.
that's breakage. Just damage to the hair shaft itself, which is a much more manageable cosmetic issue.
So see the white bulb, and you can probably relax a little. That's a huge distinction. And medically, loss is broken down into two main buckets, right?
That's right. Scarring versus non-scarring alopecia.
Non-scarring sounds like the better one to have.
It is. It means the follicles are still intact, so there's a really high potential for regrowth. With scarring alopecia, the follicle itself is destroyed. It's permanent.
Which is why early diagnosis is so critical.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's start with a really common type of non-scarring loss, one caused by something external. Traction alopecia.
Right. Traction alopecia is basically mechanical trauma. It's caused by continuous repeated tension on the hair roots.
From hairstyles.
Exactly. Things like very tight braids, ponytails, weaves, extensions, anything that's constantly pulling on the follicle until it just gets exhausted and gives up.
And the sources say this is much more common in certain groups.
It is. It's highly prevalent in women of African descent, often because of culturally significant styles that, require high tension. And it can often start in childhood when the follicles are most vulnerable.
So it starts as non-scarring, but what happens if you don't change the hairstyle?
That's the danger. If that constant pulling goes on for years, the inflammation can eventually lead to irreversible scarring. The follicle dies for good.
So management is really just stop pulling on the hair.
That's 90% of it. It's about education and immediately switching to a lower risk style. In the very early stages, we might use something like topical minoxidil or steroids to help, but the lifestyle change is everything.
Okay, let's shift from external causes to the internal ones. This is where it gets really interesting, how our hair is connected to our overall health. Let's talk about telogen effluvium.
TE. It's one of the most common causes of sudden diffuse hair loss. It's a reactive process.
Reactive to what?
To a shock to the system, a major physiological or emotional shock that basically pushes a huge number of growing hairs straight into the resting phase all at once.
What kind of shock are we talking about?
Big stuff. A severe illness, COVID-19, was a huge trigger for this. Major surgery, extreme emotional stress, even rapid weight loss from a crash diet.
Or hormonal shifts.
Oh, absolutely. Childbirth is the classic example.
The thing that confuses everyone is the timing. The hair doesn't fall out right away.
No, and that's the key. The body hits this biological panic button and diverts resources away from non-essentials, like hair growth. It pushes all those hairs into the resting, or telogen phase.
And that phase lasts a while.
It lasts about 3 months, so the actual noticeable shedding happens 1 to 6 months, but typically 3 months after the event that triggered it.
So if you get really sick in January, you might see a ton of shedding around April.
Precisely. The good news is, once the underlying cause is fixed, the cycle usually corrects itself within 6 to 9 months.
Let's dig deeper into two of those internal triggers that often need a blood test to uncover. First, thyroid hormones.
Thyroid hormones are absolutely critical. They are major regulators of the hair cycle, specifically promoting that growth or anagen phase.
And it goes both ways, right? Too much or too little can cause problems.
Exactly. Both hypothyroidism, that's an underactive thyroid, and hyperthyroidism, overactive, can cause widespread hair shedding.
And with hypothyroidism, there are some pretty specific clues to look for.
There are. The hair can become very coarse, dry, brittle, slow growing. But the classic sign our sources point to is the loss of the outer third of the eyebrow.
The outer third of the eyebrow, that's so specific. Why there?
That's a great question. It's believed that the follicles on that outer edge are especially dependent on the T3 thyroid hormone. When those levels drop, they're some of the first follicles to be affected. It's a really powerful visual cue.
A sign of a bigger systemic issue. Okay, speaking of systemic issues, let's talk about iron. People think energy, blood, but not always hair.
But it's fundamental. Iron is needed to make hemoglobin, which carries oxygen. And hair follicles need a ton of oxygen to grow and repair themselves.
So if iron is low, the body has to make choices.
It's a triage system. The body isn't going to turn off the furnace to keep the garden fountain running.
Hair is the garden fountain.
Hair is garden fountain. It prioritizes keeping your blood and vital organs going. So hair shedding can happen way before you even see changes in your red blood cell counts.
And this can look like other types of hair loss, so getting the right diagnosis is crucial.
It is. It usually starts with a ferritin test, which measures your stored iron.
Okay.
But here's a really important nuance.
Okay.
A low ferritin confirms a deficiency, for sure. But a normal ferritin doesn't necessarily mean you're in the clear.
Why not?
Because ferritin is just the warehouse. It doesn't tell you how much iron is actually circulating and available for your body to use.
So what's the better test?
For hair loss, checking the iron saturation is often a more sensitive indicator. It tells you how much iron is actually on the trucks, ready for delivery to those hungry follicles. That detail is so crucial.
That is valuable, especially before you just run out and buy a bunch of supplements. Which brings us to our next section, evaluating all those pills and potions.
Right. What does the research say for people who don't have a diagnosed deficiency?
Exactly. Let's look at the actual clinical trial evidence.
Okay, so the highest quality evidence from this big systematic review pointed to a few specific proprietary blends and ingredients.
Okay, what were they?
The brand names that showed potential were things like Viviscal, Norcrin, Nutrafol, Landapil, and Pantagar.
And these are all multi-ingredient formulas. Can we break down what's in them that seems to be doing the work?
We can. You can sort of group the promising ingredients into a couple of categories. First, you have things that are focused on anti-inflammatory or antioxidant effects.
Like
Things like omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids with antioxidants, a potent form of vitamin E called tocotrienol, and some specific apple and botanical extracts. They're all about calming down the environment around the follicle.
Okay, so that's one category. What's the other one?
The others focus more on things like hormone modulation or improving circulation.
Ah, okay.
This is where you see ingredients like zinc, capsaicin, which helps with blood flow, and maybe most interestingly, pumpkin seed oil.
Pumpkin seed oil, why that?
It's thought to have weak anti-androgenic effects. It might help block some of the hormones that contribute to pattern baldness.
So many of these aren't just filling a vitamin gap. They're trying to act like, well, like biological modulators.
Precisely. You're not just taking a vitamin pill. You're trying to optimize the microenvironment right at the follicle.
What about the things we hear about all the time, like vitamin D or biotin?
For people who aren't deficient, the evidence was considered lower quality. It doesn't mean they don't work, just that the robust, high-quality studies aren't there yet for general use.
But the safety profile was generally good.
Yes, adverse effects were reported as rare and mild, which is important.
Okay, so let's move to the big one, the medical gold standard for pattern hair loss, minoxidil, or Rogaine. I think most people think it just works by boosting blood flow.
That's part of it, but it's not the whole story. The fascinating thing is that minoxidil is actually a prodrug.
Meaning it's inactive when you put it on.
Exactly. It has to be converted into its active form, which is minoxidil sulfate. And that conversion happens because of a very specific enzyme called SLT1A1, located right there in the hair follicle.
The enzyme is the key.
The enzyme is the key. Once it's activated, it helps open up potassium channels, which widens blood vessels, sure, but it also does something else. It forces hairs that are stuck in that resting telogen phase to shed.
It pushes them out.
It pushes them out. So the follicle can basically reboot and grow a new, thicker, healthier anagen hair to replace it. It forces a reset.
And you have to stick with it, right? You can't just stop.
You have to use it indefinitely, and you have to be patient. It can take 2 to 4 months to see anything, and you won't see the maximal effect for about a year.
A year. Wow. Okay, this raises a huge question then. If that SLT1A1 enzyme is so critical, is there anything that interferes with it?
Yes. And this is a game changer for anyone using it.
What is it?
Common over-the-counter painkillers.
You're kidding.
Not at all. The sources specifically point out that things like low-dose aspirin, salicylic acid, and even paracetamol or acetaminophen, Tylenol, can inhibit that SLT1A1 enzyme.
So you could be using Rogaine every single day.
Every day for a year.
But if you're also taking Tylenol for headaches, you could be completely canceling it out.
You could be dramatically reducing its effectiveness, yes.
Yeah.
It just highlights how important it is to look at everything you're taking.
Wow. So let's bring this all together. What does this all mean for you, the listener?
I think the path forward is pretty clear.
First, don't panic. Differentiate between normal shedding and actual loss. Look for that little white bulb. Second, if you do suspect loss, get to the root cause. Ask for tests for thyroid and iron, and remember to check iron saturation, not just ferritin.
And third, approach supplements and treatments with evidence, not just marketing. Understand that something like minoxidil is a long-term commitment with very specific interactions.
And that many of those supplements are acting as anti-inflammatories or hormone modulators, not just vitamins. Early, accurate diagnosis is everything.
It really is. It dramatically improves your chances, especially for the non-scarring types of alopecia.
We've seen today just how tightly our hair is linked to this delicate systemic balance, hormonal, mechanical, nutritional. It's amazing, really. Considering the biological precision it takes just to keep our hair in that long growth phase, it makes you wonder, what other subtle, often overlooked internal signals, maybe from our stress pathways or even our circadian rhythms, might be quietly regulating our body's most complex cosmetic feature? Think about that the next time you look in the mirror.